Tonight I'm delighted to welcome our distinguished guest, Huma Bhabha. Her sculpture and works on paper are included in the Charlotte Crosby Kemper Gallery exhibition, A Whisper of Where It Came From. All of our programs at the Kemper Museum are free, and we have many people to thank for that. Karen and Jack Holland for their generous support through the Visiting Artist program, our dedicated docents and volunteers who provide knowledge and insight of the museum's exhibitions and collections and are all members of the Kemper Museum, and also our dedicated members who make it possible for the Kemper Museum's exhibitions and programming to remain free of admission. We're able to create many wonderful and insightful educational experiences with your support. The Kemper Museum is honored to have this exhibition supported by a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. In addition, I'd like to especially thank the following for their generosity in lead sustaining sponsorship of the exhibition, including Jane Voorhees, Sharon and John Hoffman, Linda Lighton and Lynn Adkins, and Dr. Antonio and Dr. Luz Rosella. We're grateful for their continued support and enthusiasm for the work that's done to create world-class exhibitions at the Kemper Museum. Born in Karachi, Pakistan, Bhabha earned a BFA at the Rhode Island School of Design and an MFA at Columbia University in New York. Her poetic assemblages are developed with tactile materials such as styrofoam, air-dried clay, wire, cork, and scraps of construction material. Often referred to as post-apocalyptic in their aesthetic, these works combine figuration with abstraction, architectural elements, and a sense of landscape. Informed by a vast array of cultural references, from the cinematography of 1979 sci-fi classics to ancient architecture, Bhabha's works transcend a singular time and place. Instead, these strands come together in a highly personal exploration of what the artist describes as the eternal concerns found across all cultures: war, colonialism, displacement, and memories of home. Bhabha's pastel works on paper are largely comprised of portraits and articulate the artist's painterly skill. Picasso-esque in form, these works blend figuration with a modernist abstraction, producing a vibrant, enchanting effect. She's even been asked to give special tours at MoMA during the Picasso sculpture exhibition due to the affinity of the artists and their shared aesthetics. In her reworked photographs taken by Bhabha in her native Karachi in southern Pakistan, the artist undermines the documentary tradition with darker, personal, and often fantastical dimension. Notable solo exhibitions include Unnatural Histories at PS1 at MoMA, Contemporary Art Center in New York, 2012 and 2013, an exhibition that significantly impacted me as a viewer, and especially since one of those pieces that was in that exhibition is now here at the Kemper Museum, the Thought Inscribed piece, the large sculptural work that has a plexi base. The Aspen Art Museum in Colorado in 2011, Stephen Friedman Gallery in London in 2010, and ATM Gallery in New York in 2004, her first solo exhibition with Kansas City dealer Bill Brady. Recent significant group exhibitions include America is Hard to See at the Whitney Museum of American Art in 2015, and the 56th International Art Exhibition, All the World's Futures, at the Venice Biennale in Venice, Italy in 2015. It's a tremendous honor for me to today welcome Huma Bhabha to the Kemper Museum. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm very honored to be here. I'm going to start with a poem by Shelley called Ozymandias. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look upon my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away." Um, I'm going to be showing you a lot of images which will be of work that, of artwork that influences me, and it'll be a variety of images which will be from the ancient to the contemporary, which either directly or indirectly inform my work, along with images of my own work. Karachi and New York are two places where I have spent my life, and the influence they've had on my work has slowly emerged. My connection to a special kind of rawness found in Karachi, where I was born and raised, and where my family lives, and the monumental scale of the concrete canyons of New York. Approaching events directly and indirectly by way of specific moments in the history of sculpture to respond to the physical connections of a certain kind of rural and urban landscape. The stories and themes, as Erin mentioned, that I have been interested in and seem to still be the same because of the way things are war, colonialism, displacement, memories of home, and the contemporary ruins of war, but without losing sight of the comedic, theatrical elements and the inherent humor that rescues from despair and probes events surgically within the shadow of popular culture. These are what make up the sculptural landscape that I operate within. The image that is on the screen at the moment is, it makes me think of a Sergio Leone movie or an end to a biblical disaster or something from a recent newscast. It's a photo of the landscape near where my family's house is in Karachi. The next few images will be of active construction sites and undeveloped areas where construction workers live. They construct these shacks, and to me, these look like a shelter as sculpture. So the reason why I'm showing these to you is because this is what kind of was inspiring to me, the innovativeness in material and how putting them together in an interesting way. The shelter, which is where the construction workers live, sometimes the guards live there, and they become almost like sculptures to me. What I find interesting is that even though these are ongoing construction sites or constructions, they actually depict more the idea of the urban ruin and our raw materials for my sculpture. This is a drawing of mine on a photograph that I took of a construction site, and this is from 2007. I started to draw on photographs in 2007 when I was making prints, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. Sculpture, more than any other art form, is about time and history, using materials which can last for centuries, and now in recent history we see more and more the use of fragile temporary materials which seem to reflect the speeding up of decay, instant ruins. There is also the historical connection to these kind of instant ruins, or the connection to romanticized ruins, and Smithson's monuments of Passaic, which are on the screen. Like him, I see beauty in these forsaken landscapes, and their scale and rawness seeps into my work. The next few images are of one of the larger sculptures that I have done to date, and it fuses all the ideas I've so far been discussing. The title of this piece is "And in the track of 100,000 years, out of the heart of dust, hope sprang again like greenness." This is from 2007. The title is from a part of a rubaiyat by Umar Khayyam, an Islamic poet from Iran who lived between 1048 and 1131. I like in this sculpture how it can be read on multiple levels, as landscape, characters on a stage where ruins go to die, a sculpture garden where the history of sculpture has ping-ponged itself into dust and serenity, theater in the round, actors so ancient that they become science fiction, staring off stage, waiting for Godot or maybe the next tragedy, a palette born in a cubist world, witness to the birth of modern war machines, monuments, obelisks, temples, hewed from refuse and shadows. The next few images are from the movie Stalker. It's a science fiction classic by Andrei Tarkovsky from 1979. When I saw this film, I realized that it reflects and shares my ideas of beauty in the ruined landscape. It also has an element of romanticism and optimism that I'm strongly attracted to. It's interesting in this movie, the original version was destroyed by some accident, and so it had to be redone with a much lesser budget. But I've always believed that you don't necessarily need that much money to make something really great again. This is an image from an Urdu newspaper from Karachi, and it's from a while ago now. And what I found interesting in this was that on the one page on the right, there is an article describing ancient monuments from the Indus Valley civilization from 2400 BC and from the Gandhara period at the bottom. And on the left is a headline that the war from Afghanistan has now reached Pakistan. And there's a photo of a child and an older man standing next to a new bombed ruin. The next couple of images are from a show by Thomas Hirschhorn, and this was a show which was also a few years back. It was at Barbara Gladstone Gallery, and I was very impressed with the show. I thought it was really great, but it was right around the time, I think it was like around 2006 or 5, and people were still sort of not ready to accept the fact, and so it made them angry that he was showing work that was talking about current events. And it's unfortunate that art is seen as not the place for political reality. It's fashionable in the art world to discuss political ideas and theories, but political reality is ignored at all cost. I also love how Hirschhorn has incorporated African art, current events, and modernist abstraction into this installation, making it very original and alive. African art has always been a huge influence on my work. The scale, the imagery, and the sophistication in dealing with the figure. So I look at a lot of, whenever I'm stuck during the process of my work making a sculpture, I turn to a few books that I have. I mean, I like to look at a lot of books, but in the end, some of your favorite books are the ones that you end up looking at all the time. So when I'm stuck, I'm always looking at one of my African art books. This is a piece of mine from 2000. It's titled Centaur, and it was a piece that was kind of like a breakthrough piece for me when I realized a certain kind of change was beginning to happen in my work. And and I went with it, and I think it was a good decision on my part. And this image is, so basically the first image is relating very much to this image, which is Joseph Boy's Chair with Fat. I am a huge fan of his work and his connection to history, fiction, and non-fiction. I like the ritualistic quality and how his work has a fragile, transformative mythology. I also like how his work has been photographed in his studio, and then this is his studio. And then it makes me think of Brancusi's photographs of his sculptures in his studio. This is an intense view of a Michael Heiser piece, which is called Double Negative. Like Boy's, it has a timelessness, but is permanent and solid in comparison. This is a drawing on a photograph that I took from 2007. This is a broken Atlas figure from the Temple of Jupiter in Agrigento, Sicily. An ancient eroded stupa from 4000 BC from southern Pakistan. It's another drawing with ink on photograph from 2007. The photos are pretty much all taken in Karachi. As we go along, there are images that I've now started to photograph in other places. But this is taken in Karachi, and this is also from 2007. The next couple of images are from the vast complex of abandoned temples at Angkor Wat in Cambodia, built between 879 and 1218. And what I like in these temples or these monuments is the way the stone is stacked and carved. I myself use stacking as armature in my pieces. This is a beautiful relief from Babylon. The demon from Jeepers Creepers, the movie. An ancient Roman head. This is a beautiful mask, or I guess like a head sculpture by Matthew Monahan. Here is an example of a contemporary use of fragile materials like paper, referring to an image or a mask which seems ancient and timeless. This is a sculpture of mine titled They Don't Speak, also from 2007. I started making what I call busts from around 2004, and was very much aware of Picasso when I was working on those. And this is also when some of the materials that I use for my armatures, like styrofoam and wood and clay, were introduced. I began to also like how the materials that I was putting together complemented each other. It was a combination that I had not seen before being used by anybody else. And also realizing how modeling the clay in a expressionistic way was something that I was able to do, but I was also really enjoying. And once I sort of came to these realizations, then the work started to develop in a very rich direction. This is another bust or head piece titled JC from 2006. And this one is untitled from 2008. This image relates to an earlier image I showed of tanks in the green wastelands of Stalker. But it is of a tank in the entrance to the Baghdad Museum. I'm also interested in how the ancient is contrasted here with the frighteningly new. These are some examples of Saddam Hussein's fascist monuments. This is a sculpture by Sterling Ruby. It's an earlier sculpture of his. And I like very much how it relates to the Boli sculpture, which is this one. Both of them, the similarity that I find between them is that the materials are basically synthetic versus, in this case, natural. But they have a very similar spirit, very fetishistic and ritualistic in their use. An image from a Karachi newspaper of an I-beam being transported by a donkey cart. It's a common sight, and donkey carts are used for a lot of transportation in Pakistan. And they're amazingly resilient and strong animals, and also one of my favorite animals. This is a sculpture of mine titled The Main Player from 2007. It is an important piece because it is a larger, it's larger than some of the earlier ones that I showed you, but the idea is still the same. It's like the idea of a large head. And, but in this one, I have developed the landscape idea more, and also the shift in scale from landscape to architecture and from armature to bust. So this is approximately 7 feet long because of the base at the bottom, and probably about 3.5 feet high. This is Balzac by Rodin. I happened to be looking at Rodin a lot when I first started experimenting with clay. And I was in Guadalajara in Mexico with my husband and another artist friend who was using clay, and I decided to sort of try out just clay for just to see what I could do with it. And that's when I realized that I really enjoyed it and had a natural feel for it. I also, the clay was always in our sort of hotel room in big black garbage bags. And later on there was a Rodin book there, and then there was a clay in the garbage bags, and that eventually led to a piece that I will show you later. So this is another bust sculpture from 2004. It's untitled, and it's obviously a very romantic piece and referring to Balzac and Beauty and the Beast by Jean Cocteau. This is an ancient image of a Laocoon, which is also speculated to be a fake antiquity by Michelangelo. An image of an ancient Ganesh. This piece is titled Sleeper. It's from 2005. It was my first life-size standing figure. I was thinking of the chorus, and it's interesting how the pedestal is part of the sculpture, and it's also a found object. So when you look at something like this, then is it stuck in the white cube pedestal, or is that part of it? All these kind of questions that are the ambiguity is something that I'm interested in. And something I wanted to mention was that, in my work, because each side is almost like telling a different story. So the idea is that, you have to walk around them. So it's pretty much sculpture in the round, so that you can sort of see each side is slightly different or referring to something different, or adding to more information or the layering of information. This is an early chorus. An ancient Egyptian couple. I'm really drawn to the idea of walking monuments. This is an ancient Aztec stone sculpture of Coatlicue in Mexico City. This piece is titled Degraded, from 2006. It's a Roman torso with 2x4 chorus legs. It's also based on The Walking Man by Rodin. I had mentioned earlier about Brancusi's use of photography when he took photographs in his studio of his sculptures. And so here is an image of him in his studio. And what I really like is the cinematic element that he creates, and that is something that I have tried to develop in my photos of sculpture. This is a piece by Matthew Day Jackson, a take on Brancusi, and I like how he splices the history of North America with the history of sculpture. This sculpture, this is actually a photograph of mine, and it's in the vein of Brancusi. It's titled Nelly, from 2003, and it was also done in Mexico, in Guadalajara. And this shows my sort of further experiments in clay modeling and using photography and in a cinema-like setting. It also reminds me of a mix of Vermeer meets Bernini's Saint Teresa in Ecstasy. This is Giacometti. His sculptures sometimes give the feeling that time really flattens things. They are so weathered that they look ancient. This is Rauschenberg's monogram from 1955. He is a huge influence. This sculpture is titled Bumps in the Road. It's from 2008. The title refers to a US soldier's term for driving over dead bodies in Iraq. I liked how I developed the idea of the stage, plinth, road, and I'm looking back at the larger piece that I showed you, which was titled And in the Track of 100,000 Years, from 2007. So this is a year later, and in this piece, I have much more implied movement, and that is something I get very much from looking at Rodin. It makes me think of. It also makes me think of Don Quixote and Sancho Panza traveling down Cormac McCarthy's The Road. This is Burghers of Calais by Rodin, And you can almost imagine a camera tracking around the figures. It's very theatrical in an extremely modern way. This piece is titled Magic Carpet. It's from 2003. The base is clear plexi, and the carpet used to belong to me. And here it's sort of like everything is found. The boots were found, and it's cheap special effects, the idea of lovers, and it has a very romantic, emotive quality. This is Donatello's David. This is David Almage. I love here the grafting of the classical with the sci-fi. This is another one of his giant sculptures. This piece is titled International Monument from 2004. I started working on this with the idea of making a giant hand, and it eventually gradually developed into, for me, it became developed into a monument with a bone at the base of it. And also the title kind of refers to Tatlin's model for a monument. When I moved upstate after living in New York City for a long time, I looked for a job, and the only job that I got, which was working in a taxidermy studio. And that's where I actually picked up a lot of techniques for making my sculptures, and I also collected a lot of bones and skulls that I ended up using in my work. This piece is untitled, and it's from 2005. It's an Imperial Stormtrooper reclining. This is the piece that is also untitled from 2005. I did 3 versions of it. And when I was mentioning earlier that I first started to experiment with clay around that time, around 2003-4, and the clay was usually in black garbage bags to keep it wet, and then also whatever was being made was being kept wet in black garbage bags. So when I returned to New York, I started using air dry clay because I didn't want to fire the clay, but I was still using the garbage bag. But gradually I just let the materials sort of dictate, and as I started to progress, I realized that something very important was happening in my work. The black garbage bag in itself was a material that I had to let dominate, and so it basically developed into a figure that is a prostrate praying figure, and I also see this as a memorial. The landscape is the pedestal. I also then, because most of my sculptures, due to reasons of practical reasons, like how do you get something outside the door, or how heavy is something, or should it be in different sections. So a lot of my work is made so that it can be assembled. And so the same thing happened with this piece. So it can be assembled and reassembled. So I used it to make photographic pieces. This piece, I took it to different locations and did a series of photographs with in a different landscape, but they exist in a different medium as photography. So the same thing that I was sort of borrowing from the tradition from Brancusi and from Kiefer and other artists like that, who use their sculpture and use photography and basically add another medium to their work. Here is another example of a photographic piece. Once again, here I was using real clay, so again there was a time factor as to, because usually, and this photograph was done in Karachi, so usually every day is a sunny day over there. But for some reason, when the sculpture was made, and then I was waiting for the sun to be right on top so that the photograph would come out beautifully. So anyway, I had a bit of a problem with that, but so you can see that it starts to crack and fall apart a little bit at the bottom. But then again, that is something that the sculpture is also about. So it kind of helped. And this is another example of a photographic piece. Again, I made the sculpture and then photographed it in different locations. The idea of documenting them is, it is also about documenting the sculptures, but then also using photography as a medium to explore the implied narrative. This sculpture is titled Museum Without Walls, and it's from 2005. I started it out with the idea of making a large head inspired by Picasso's Head of a Woman, which I had seen at MoMA. And but again, I was using different materials, and this is like being inspired by that, and then trying to create a large head, and realizing. But once this piece started to develop, I came to the realization the possibilities of landscape, modernism, and scale that came up, and the exposed armature could be read as a modernist architectural structure or a postmodernist one. This piece is from 2006. It's titled Sell the House. This is Picasso's bronze piece, and the same idea of the crouching figure, giant head, and it is also about recycling. This piece is titled Man of No Importance from 2006, and again, I was making a lot of giant heads in landscape. And this is an interior shot of a smaller sculpture within the sculpture. It's a detail. And these images highlight the scale changes that I started to notice that I could work with. And I see these scale changes as metaphors for time changes, prehistory, post-history, and the contemporary. And these same shifting ideas of time I see in the writings of Philip K. Dick, who has also been very influential, and I've read a lot of his books. He's a science fiction writer, and I found this great woodcut image of him. This piece is Untitled from 2006. It's a white styrofoam totem with clay hands and clay head. It's also life-size. Here's another sculpture titled Athos from 2006. It's also a life-size, approximately 6 feet high. In this piece, I started to carve the styrofoam. So I think that I only have one image, but you can see because the torso is made out of styrofoam. And this one is titled Born Darkly from 2008. It's carved foam with clay. In 2009, I came across some cork, which was being sold by this guy who had a greeting card store near where I live. He was selling everything, the inventory in his store, and so I went in and bought a bunch of things from him for very little money, and he had blocks of cork which were wrapped in wrapping paper, but they looked like had been like that for the last 30 years. So I took some of those and I took the unwrapped ones and I basically took them to my studio and I said, well, one day I'll figure out what to do with them because I'm always looking for new materials. So eventually I decided to glue the 12 by 12 pieces of these blocks of cork together, and this is one of the first pieces that I made. It's untitled, and basically this led to a whole series of cork sculptures which have developed in very rich ways, and I'm still working on them. This piece is titled 1000. It's from 2009. It is a depiction of medieval effigies, and I see this as a sarcophagus or a tomb that has become a plinth with urban graffiti friezes, where the sculptures on top are representations of what was buried inside. They can also be seen as a reclining figure or a pair of architectural models for imagined tombs. So the graffiti that you will see over here and on this side, and then the drawing, basically I'm very drawn to graffiti wherever one sees it, whether it's in the United States or in Europe, and even in Pakistan there's a lot of graffiti, and it's interesting to notice how in different places it's done for different reasons. But it's always quite beautiful. And in Pakistan, for example, there was also a show that I saw on television about it where they were focusing in on, because over there you'll see it, there'll be political slogans, and people use a lot of, they use it to paint, and they also write, the script is very beautiful. So they use different scripts, and they also try to sort of sell their painterly wares that way. But also people doing different professions will be using it to advertise themselves. So there are all these different reasons. So that kind of attracted me, and I thought it would be interesting to experiment with that. I think the next couple of images are of drawings on photographs that I took also around 2007, which some of them were made into a series of prints, because when I was at RISD in undergraduate, I did printmaking, so I was very familiar with the process. I never did it again after I left school, but this time around somebody else was making the prints for me, so it's much easier because it's much more interesting when you work with a master printer. And so basically I did the drawings that were converted into prints, and then I continued to do drawings on photographs after that, and I'm still doing them. So I took a lot of pictures of foundations, architectural foundations, and landscape, and I like the idea of walking monuments or monuments that have been, sort of imaginary monuments, or what's left of them. And then I started to use color. And it started to become more psychedelic. I was talking about African sculpture a while ago and how I'm, something that I find, I'm very, very attracted to it, and obviously trying to be a student of it. And the symmetry is a huge influence, the way they make the way the face is dealt with, and even in the body. And it's something that I obviously, because I have a lot of images in my studio, or sometimes I have them on the wall, and so I'm constantly looking at the same thing over and over again. And I was looking at the face of this actor, Lance Henriksen, who's a character actor who I also like very much, and how his face looks so much like the African sculpture. So I thought I'd put that in. But I also like the idea of character actors who are really good at their craft, and they're like true artisans, and that's how I see myself, as an artisan who uses my hands. This is a drawing, again, it's a pastel drawing on paper, and again, you can see the influence of the couple of images I showed before. I used to do a lot of portraiture and use a lot of pastels when I was in high school. And then, I went to art school, and then I stopped doing it. But then my husband kept encouraging me, and so I went back to it, and now I'm doing them. Then I also started to, once I started to do the pastel portraits, then I moved on to the photographs that I had taken and do portraiture on top of them. So this is from 2010, and this is also from 2010. So these are basically, there's more of a Picasso influence in these, and they're black ink on photographs. And then this is, the next few are some examples of pastel and ink portraits on paper, and with then gradually introducing collage. This is a larger, and then I started to expand the photographs. And these are approximately 50 by 80 inches. And I take all the photographs myself, so they're not, I'm not a photographer, so the photographs are not perfectly taken. But basically, I'm looking for a certain kind of image. And then, so I've drawn on this. So this one is titled Bagram from 2010. This is an image of a lithograph, a series of this is one image from a series of lithographs that Martin Kippenberger did shortly before he died. And it's an amazing portfolio of lithographs. It was inspired by Jericho's Raft of the Medusa. And this next image is from the movie La Ventura, which is an Antonioni film from 1960, when the couple is in the boat going to the island which is in front, where the woman disappears. So basically, I was thinking of this, and I had seen his show at MoMA, and some of the paintings and the lithographs were there, and they had a very, very strong emotive quality. And obviously he was dying, and then there's this movie that I saw, and so just basically I'm trying to explain to you how I think sometimes in relation to when I'm thinking of sculptures. And then I was set in the mood to make this piece, which is titled My Skull is Too Small, which I made for the 2010 Whitney Biennial. So I had also, because I like to use recycled materials, and I collect a lot of junk and found objects and found wood. So when people give me stuff also, I willingly take everything. So these beautiful pedestals made out of maple were actually made for another artist at my gallery, and she didn't like them because I think they were somehow they didn't work for her show. So then basically they offered them to me, so I took them and made a whole body of work out of them. So this was one of the pedestals that I inherited, where again I'm doing a lot of personal messages and some graffiti, and but this time it's a lot more personal and private messages and friezes. So I see the sculpture as a boat, and there are these two elements on each side, or characters. Also, I see this piece also as a kind of memorial, and it's different from how it reads. It further explores some of the ideas that I was working on in the piece 1000, and but this piece is more like death, death as traveling at sea, going over to the other side, or waving goodbye. So it's like that. And the graffiti is more like decorations on a boat. This is my second bronze sculpture, which is life size, and it's from 2007. It has a silver patina, and it is titled The Orientalist. The title is from a book by Edward Said, which I was reading again. I had read it when I was in undergraduate, and I was reading it again at that time. And it has the face of Dorian Gray. And Dorian Gray as a metaphor for corrupt ideas such as Orientalism, which thrived during wealthy Victorian England at that time. This is another detail. I see it also as an Egyptian sphinx, or a seated god, or a cyborg king. It's made out of all kinds of different materials, and then cast into bronze. The next few sculptures that I'm going to show you are from 2010, and some of them have those bases that I got, and again exploring the same ideas of standing figures, walking large heads, and using the base as a form of landscape. This sculpture is titled Bleakman, from 2010. This one is Tupac Amaru, also 2010. This is another view, a side view of the sculpture. This piece is titled HQ. I do on occasion more abstract pieces, and this is more abstract, it's less figurative. This piece is titled Finger, from 2010. This is another view of it. And there's a buffalo skull. As I mentioned, I have quite a few skulls. This piece is my first cork bronze. And this is from 2010. It's titled Lecturer. And it was in a show in Italy, and it was interesting. That's why I use this image, because I like how it comfortably fits in with the sort of antiquities in the back. This is a photographic, it's a photo drawing on a photograph with collage. It's also from 2010. This is another life-size cork figure called Student. And it's interesting in this piece for me that I actually ran out of cork, so I wanted it to be a specific size, and then I had already been using styrofoam, so I decided to add styrofoam to it. And which was, I think on my part, it was a good decision because it made it more complicated and more interesting, and it also solved the problem. For me, it's always interesting when you can, you come across these things and then you solve the problem and it makes it something more interesting. This piece is called Ghost from 2008. This is also life-size. This is a painted bronze, which is approximately 8 feet high, and it's titled Ghost of Human Kindness from 2011, and it's about 8.5 feet high. And it's the second time that I used the materials, which are styrofoam and clay, which were made into a painted bronze. What's interesting about this is that it actually, the illusion that bronze can create sometimes when you're, because it looks very light, and so you feel like you can walk up to it and just push it and all the styrofoam will come tumbling down, but it's approximately 1 ton in its weight. And it's not a new idea, but the element of casual but expressive construction adds to it. And there's also different materials which have been made into bronze. This is another cork bronze, which is also approximately 8 feet high. And this is from 2012. And this has a patina as opposed to a painted bronze. And the effect of this one is very opposite to the one I showed you previously, because sometimes when you work in one material and then you transform it into a different material, the whole thing just completely changes. And so it becomes, has a very molten lava and like effect, and it looks, it feels very heavy. I mean it is heavy, but the bronze transforms. This is the detail. This is Thought and Scribe, which it's nice that it's actually right here, so if you wanted to check it out later, you can. It was the idea, when I showed you earlier on a sculpture which was titled Magic Carpet, was the first time I used, actually it was the second time I used plexiglass. And I waited a long time before I could use plexi again, and one of the reasons is because it's used a lot by a lot of other artists, and it's used a lot for display and for different things. So I wanted to come up with a sort of a platform or a pedestal that would be very intense and work very well with the sculpture. So the idea of this is actually from an Egyptian sculpture of Thought and Scribe. Thought is the baboon god of wisdom, and his scribe sits below him and writes down his words. So the plexi here also creates a very sci-fi kind of feeling for me. It feels like the sculpture is levitating or is going to rise. And Egyptians are always aliens in a common sci-fi theme, Egyptians as aliens. So, I mean, I watch a lot of science fiction, so, but there's also, in this sculpture, homages being paid to Chamberlain, and, there's different things going on, and it's actually a 3-headed figure, and so that's the story behind Thought and Scribe. Um, the next few images are of installation shots are from my show at MoMA PS1, which was titled Unnatural Histories. So in this image you see a god and a ghost welcoming you into the show. So both the sculptures were in the courtyard. This is the sculpture that the show was titled after, which is also titled Unnatural Histories. That's the back of the piece. It's made up of 5 different elements, and I also introduced tire treads into this, which is something that I'd been thinking about for a while. Because driving around, you always see all these tires sort of almost discarded on the side of the highways, and so it was something that I wanted to sort of introduce. So there is this kind of landscape, and then various different elements, and the pedestals again are sort of arranged for this piece. This is about 16 feet long and about 8 feet wide. And there's always little details in some of these sculptures of drawings to sort of, again, when I mentioned earlier, the shift of scale. So you can think of this as a very monumental sculpture, and then there's smaller things to sort of take you in and out of this kind of architectural armature. This piece is was my first very large cork piece. It's about 8 feet high and 24 inches in the round. And the title of this is There Is No Killing What Can't Be Killed, from 2012. Most of the work that was in the PS1 show was made between 2012 and 13. So it wasn't, I didn't see it as it's not a retrospective, it was just sort of like a show. This is a drawing with a large photo drawing with a collage from 2013. It's about 50 by 80 inches. This is another drawing on photograph and the same size. This piece is from 2014. It's also life-size. It's titled Vessel. I mentioned earlier that I showed, I think, some examples of drawings on paper with ink and pastel, and then I started to introduce collage, started to work with images from wildlife calendars. These are approximately 22 by 30 inches. And these are a little bit more recent, from 2015, drawings on photographs with an introduction of different kinds of collage. One of them is, a few of them are here in the show also, from the same time. This is also, I see this as kind of my Lao Kun. This is one of my newer bronzes from 2014. It's titled Constantium. Everything is bronze, the chain and the base. This is also a bronze sculpture. It's titled Friend from 2015. It's about 8 feet high and about 4 inches in width. This is a large drawing. I started to draw on some of these. This drawing and the next drawing are basically drawings that came about from my studio practice and from studio traffic, and noticing that there was almost like rheograms, tracking the forest of the sculptures. So this drawing is approximately 13 feet high and about 4.5 feet wide, and it has a steel frame. This is another large cork sculpture. It's titled Against What, Against Whom from 2014. And this is the last image. It's Atlas from 2015, intertwined tire treads, solidified ghosts of travel, but it's been reincarnated into a figure. And that's it. Thank you. Sure.
Anybody have any questions?
What were the books about African art that you go back to? What are they called?
They're older books. I found, but I mean, basically, I found them at the Strand. But I like older books because it's more about the images. The images are really nice and big. I'd have to send it to you. Yes.
One of the questions that we get in the show with your photo collage, you have plants that are in the collage. Can you tell us what those plants are?
They're marijuana plants. They're centerfolds from High Times magazine. So I like the idea of the centerfold. Sorry? What? Yeah. No, they're very, they're made to look very beautiful. So, yes.
Could you say, first of all, thank you for sharing your work. Could you say a little bit about the relationship between your figural work and your interest in the monumental and kind of ruined monument? Do you see those intersecting, or do you think of your figural work as kind of different than your interest in monuments and ruin?
Most monuments that I because I obviously like looking at a lot of monumental sculpture and monuments, and usually they are in the form of a figure or the person that had them made. So for me, they are sort of the same, so figurative sculpture is something that my work is very expressionistic and sort of figurative based. And with pieces like Thought and Scribe, there's a chance to sort of work on the non-figurative aspects of it, which is where it, you think of the more architectural part of it, or like the other larger pieces I showed. But ultimately, it's always is about a figure that sort of is introduced somehow. Even in Thought and Scribe, it is two figures that are sort of interacting with each other. But I leave it open and sort of approach them in a different way. But I'm still thinking of it. And for me, the idea of the monumental is not that I make them necessarily so big, but the presence is strong. So, but the idea of death and the monument is like, leaves all this area for you to explore, to make. It's like a raw material for me.
Do museums or collectors ever have concerns about the fragility of your work, about it potentially falling apart?
They sometimes ask that, but it's like any other work. Basically, I use I make sure that it's going to last. So,
Huma, thank you so much.
thank you.